The proximity alarm chimed through Haven's rest with the particular tone that meant either easy money or expensive trouble. Jake Morrison looked up from the hyperdrive coupling he'd been wrestling with for the past 3 hours, wiping grease-stained hands on coveralls that had seen better decades. Emergency docking request, Bay 7, announced the station's AI in its perpetually cheerful voice. Vessel requests immediate mechanical assistance. Of course they do, Jake muttered, setting down his plasma welder. Because nobody ever wants mechanical assistance at convenient times. He made his way through the station's cramped corridors, past the usual collection of traders, smugglers, and travelers who found themselves in need of neutral territory repairs. Haven's Rest didn't ask questions about cargo or destinations, which made it popular with people who valued discretion over luxury accommodations. Bay 7's observation window revealed a sleek starcruiser unlike anything in Jake's considerable experience. The hull gleamed with an opalescent finish that seemed to shift colors as the station's docking lights played across its surface. The design married elegant curves with purposeful angles, suggesting both beauty and function in ways that made Jake's engineer soul sing with appreciation. "Well, hello, gorgeous," he said to the ship. "What brings you to my little corner of nowhere?" The docking sequence completed with mechanical precision, and Jake found himself facing an airlock that opened with a soft hiss of equalizing atmosphere. The woman who emerged moved with fluid grace, her only non-human feature being delicately pointed ears that gave her an ethereal quality. She wore simple traveling clothes that nonetheless managed to look expensive, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style that framed intelligent eyes. "You must be the mechanic," she said, her voice carrying cultured tones that suggested excellent education and careful breeding. "I'm Lyra. My ship requires urgent attention." Jake Morrison, and urgent usually means expensive. He gestured toward the starcruiser. "What seems to be the problem?" "Cascade failures in the quantum matrix, power distribution irregularities, and what I believe you would call a whole lot of things that shouldn't be sparking." The corner of her mouth quirked upward. "Is that sufficient technical detail?" Jake found himself grinning. "That's the most honest diagnostic I've heard all week. Most people try to convince me it's just a simple calibration issue. I find honesty saves time, which I happen to value highly." "Smart policy. Let me take a look at our systems and see what we're dealing with." Jake grabbed his diagnostic kit from the nearby tool locker. "Fair warning, though. Ships this advanced usually require parts that cost more than small planets. Cost is not a primary concern." Lyra stepped aside as Jake approached the airlock. "Quality of work, however, is essential." "Lady, you just said the magic words." Jake activated his scanner, immediately noting readings that made his eyebrows climb toward his hairline. "Your ship's got more processing power than most space stations." "What exactly do you do for a living?" "I solve problems," Lyra replied smoothly. "Complex ones that require delicate handling." "Diplomat. Something like that." Jake's scanner beeped with increasingly concerned tones as it cataloged the vessel's sophisticated systems. "Well, whatever kind of problems you solve, someone really wanted to stop you from solving them. This damage pattern suggests you were running from something with serious firepower. An occupational hazard." Lyra watched him work, her gaze sharp and evaluative. "How long will repairs take?" "Depends on how much of this is essential versus nice to have." Jake gestured at the scanner's display. "Your basic life support and propulsion I can have running in 6 hours. The advanced stuff, quantum communications array, long-range sensors, whatever this thing is that looks like a miniature sun, that's going to take considerably longer." "All of it is essential. Then we're looking at 3 days minimum, assuming I can source the parts." Jake paused, studying her expression. "You seem remarkably calm for someone whose expensive ship is held together with hope and emergency patches." "Panic rarely improves outcomes." Lyra moved past him into the ship's corridor. Shall we begin with the most critical systems? After you, your diplomaticness. The starcruiser's engineering section made Jake feel like a child in a candy store. If candy stores were filled with quantum processors and exotic matter containment units. Every surface gleamed with purpose, from the crystalline conduits carrying data streams at light speed to the power coupling matrix that hummed with barely contained energy. Sweet mother of physics, Jake breathed, running his scanner along a damaged power relay. This isn't just advanced technology, this is technology that's having philosophical discussions with the future. Lyra followed him through the narrow maintenance corridor, moving with the easy familiarity of someone who knew every bolt and circuit on the ship. The quantum drive housing sustained the primary damage. Everything else is secondary system, failures caused by feedback loops. Feedback loops that could have turned you into exotic particles scattered across 3-star systems. Jake crouched beside the drive assembly, whistling softly as he examined the microfractures spreading through the containment matrix. Someone up there likes you, because this should have exploded spectacularly. I prefer to think of it as superior engineering rather than divine intervention. Superior engineering, designed by someone who clearly never had to repair it in a cramped maintenance bay with basic tools. Jake began disconnecting the damaged components with practiced efficiency. Though I have to admit, whoever built this has taste. Most ships are all function and no style. This beauty manages to be both elegant and practical. The designers believed that form should reflect purpose without sacrificing aesthetic appeal. Lyra handed him a tool before he could ask for it, demonstrating knowledge of ship repair that seemed inconsistent with her diplomatic cover story. How familiar are you with quantum matrix stabilization? Familiar enough to know that one wrong move turns us both into interesting cloud formations. Jake paused in his work, glancing at her with growing curiosity. You seem to know your way around these systems pretty well for a problem solver. I make it my business to understand the tools I depend on. Smart policy. Most of my customers think ships run on good intentions and regular cleaning. He carefully extracted a burned-out coupling, examining it with the concentration of a jeweler appraising diamonds. This little beauty cost more than I make in a year, and it's completely fried. The good news is I think I can fabricate a replacement. The bad news is it's going to take some creative engineering. Lyra moved closer, studying the damaged component with obvious interest. What kind of creative engineering? The kind that involves taking parts designed for completely different purposes and convincing them to play nicely together. Jake grinned, already visualizing the solution. I've got some military-grade power regulators that should work if I modify their resonance frequency, and a quantum stabilizer from a mining barge that's about 3 times too big but twice as reliable as the original. That sounds like an improvisation rather than a repair. Lady, improvisation is the heart of good engineering. Anyone can replace broken parts with identical components. It takes real skill to make different parts work better than the originals. Jake began sketching modifications on his tablet. Though I should warn you, my repairs tend to be more robust than elegant. Your ship might work perfectly, but it won't win any beauty contests for technical purity. Function over form has its own appeal. Spoken like someone who's had to rely on jury-rigged systems in a crisis. Jake looked up from his calculations, catching something in her expression that suggested personal experience with desperate situations. You've been in some tight spots, haven't you? Haven't we all? Lyra deflected smoothly. How long will the modifications take? 6 hours if everything goes perfectly, 12 hours when reality inevitably intervenes. Jake stood, stretching muscles already protesting the cramped working conditions. Want some coffee while I start fabricating parts? Fair warning, station coffee has been known to dissolve hull plating. I'll risk it. As they made their way back toward the station's common area, Jake found himself stealing glances at his mysterious customer. There was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence that suggested authority without arrogance. Not to mention the casual way she'd offered to pay whatever his repairs cost, as if money was merely a convenient abstraction rather than a limiting factor. The modified quantum stabilizer took shape under Jake's expert hands like a mechanical sculpture, each component carefully adjusted to harmonize with systems it was never designed to interface with. Lyra watched from nearby, occasionally offering theoretical insights that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of exotic physics. The resonance cascade should stabilize at 47.3 terahertz, she observed as Jake fine-tuned the frequency modulator. Should being the operative word, Jake replied, making minute adjustments with a precision instrument that looked like it belonged in a surgeon's kit. Quantum mechanics has a sense of humor, and it's not always funny. The coupling assembly had been fighting him for the past 2 hours, refusing to achieve stable resonance despite his increasingly creative persuasion techniques. Jake had progressed through his entire vocabulary of mechanical encouragement, from polite requests to colorful threats involving percussive maintenance. "Come on, you aristocratic piece of over-engineered perfection," he muttered at the stubborn component. "You're not too good to work with honest military surplus parts." Lyra's laugh surprised him, not the polite chuckle he'd expected, but genuine delight that transformed her composed features into something warm and approachable. Aristocratic circuits with delusions of grandeur. Hey, don't knock it. I've met plenty of systems that think they're too sophisticated for practical repairs. Jake paused in his work, grinning at her reaction. Though I suppose that's not something you'd encounter in diplomatic circles. You'd be surprised. I've met quite a few individuals who believe their elevated status exempts them from basic functionality. Sounds like you deal with the same personality types I do, just in fancier clothes. Jake returned his attention to the coupling, finally achieving the harmonic balance that had been eluding him. There we go. Sometimes you just have to remind technology who's in charge. As the repaired systems came online, the ship's ambient lighting shifted to a warmer spectrum, and the background hum of machinery took on a more satisfied tone. Jake consulted his diagnostic readings with growing satisfaction. "Your ship's practically purring," he announced. "Quantum matrix stability at 96%, power distribution smooth as silk, and all the sparking has been reduced to artistically appropriate levels." Artistically appropriate. A little bit of visible energy discharge adds character. Completely sterile systems are boring. Jake began packing his tools, the familiar ritual marking another successful repair. "Though I have to ask, where exactly are you headed that requires this level of technological sophistication? Because this ship could outrun most military patrol boats and outthink their computers while doing it." Lyra's expression became carefully neutral. "My work takes me to various locations with different requirements." Right, diplomatic problem solving. Jake wasn't buying the evasion, but he'd learned that pushing customers for personal information was bad for business. "Well, whatever problems you're solving, you'll be able to solve them at maximum efficiency." "Thank you, your work is exceptional." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I don't suppose you ever consider taking your skills to different locations." "You mean permanent employment?" Jake considered the offer, surprised by how tempting it sounded. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm pretty attached to my independence. Plus, someone needs to keep this old station running, and the regular customers would probably mutiny if I disappeared." "Of course, I understand the appeal of being your own master." Something in her tone suggested personal experience with the alternative, but Jake didn't pursue the thought. Instead, he focused on the growing reluctance he felt to see this job end. Working with Lyra had been genuinely enjoyable. Her quick understanding, dry humor, and obvious appreciation for good craftsmanship made her the kind of customer he wished he encountered more often. The final systems integration should be complete in another hour. he said, consulting his diagnostic tablet. "Then you can get back to solving those complex problems of yours." "Yes," Lyra replied softly, "back to work." Neither of them seemed particularly eager to acknowledge that their collaboration was drawing to a close, and Jake found himself slowing his pace as he made the final adjustments, savoring the last moments of working alongside someone who truly understood the artistry hidden within engineering precision. The final diagnostic sweep showed perfect integration across all systems, every indicator glowing green with the satisfaction of machinery operating at peak efficiency. Jake stood back from the main console, wiping his hands on a rag that had become more symbolic than functional after 3 days of intensive repair work. "She's ready," he announced, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Quantum matrix stability at 98%, which is actually better than factory specifications. Your ship should run like a dream and probably outlast whatever you throw at her." Lyra ran her own diagnostics from the pilot's station, her fingers dancing across controls with practiced familiarity. "Remarkable. The power efficiency is 15% higher than original parameters. That's what happens when you replace aristocratic components with working-class parts that actually care about doing their job properly." Jake began collecting his tools, each instrument finding its designated place in his kit with automatic precision. "Though I should mention, the modifications void your warranty. Not that I imagine that's a concern for someone in your line of work. Warranties are rarely relevant to my operational requirements." Jake paused in his packing, struck by something in her tone. "You know, in 3 days of working together, you've managed to tell me absolutely nothing about what you actually do. Is that unusual?" "For most customers, yeah. People love talking about themselves, especially when someone's fixing their expensive toys." He secured the final tool in its foam cradle. "But you've been politely evasive about everything except quantum physics and engineering principles." "Perhaps I simply prefer to keep my professional and personal lives separate. Or perhaps you're someone important enough that casual conversation could become complicated." Jake closed his tool kit with a definitive click. "Either way, it's none of my business. You paid for ship repairs, not psychological analysis." Lyra approached the tool bench where Jake was finalizing his work, moving with that characteristic grace that had intrigued him from their first meeting. "About payment. Standard rates plus materials," Jake interrupted. "Don't even think about trying to overpay me. Good work deserves fair compensation, not charity." "I wasn't offering charity. I was attempting to show appropriate appreciation for exceptional service." She retrieved a credit chip from her pocket, holding it with the casual confidence of someone for whom money was never a limiting factor. "Your repairs exceeded every expectation." "That's what I do. Well, that and consume unhealthy quantities of station coffee." Jake accepted the payment chip, noting its premium alloy construction and wondering what kind of diplomatic work came with such expensive accessories. "You should be all set for whatever complex problems are waiting for you out there." "Yes, complex problems." Lyra seemed to hesitate as if considering words that remained unspoken. "Jake, if circumstances were different." "Hey, no need to get sentimental. We had a good working relationship, your ship is fixed, and you've got places to be." Jake grinned, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of her departure. "Besides, the galaxy's smaller than people think. Maybe our paths will cross again sometime." "Perhaps they will." She extended her hand for a farewell handshake, and Jake was surprised by the firm strength of her grip and the genuine warmth in her expression. For a moment, he glimpsed something beneath her diplomatic composure, a person who carried significant burdens but had found genuine enjoyment in their simple collaboration. "Take care of yourself out there," he said, "and try not to let anyone shoot holes in my beautiful repairs. I'll do my best to preserve your handiwork." Jake watched from the observation deck as the starcruiser departed, its elegant form disappearing into hyperspace, with a flash of displaced energy that left only empty space and the memory of 3 days that had passed far too quickly. He stood there longer than necessary, oddly reluctant to return to the routine maintenance tasks waiting in his workshop. "Strange woman," he said to the empty observation deck.